It is a scam when you don't allow everyone to operate on fair terms.
We are the Robin Hoods of sports betting. We take something back from the rich bookies and enable our customers to beat them instead.
Hi guys, Alex here. Welcome to episode 55 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by Pro Sports Bettor Danshan. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good. Mate, you approached me after I obviously listened to your podcast with Jake, which was on the Business of Betting podcast, which was, very, very intriguing for me. And I'm sure lots of people, it seemed like it got a really good reaction on Twitter. And then you approached me. I hadn't even listened to the podcast yet, and you'd approached me, said you'd love to come, flesh out on some of those topics you talked about, which was awesome. And shortly after listening to the podcast, I was more than happy to have you on, mate. How did you like the feedback from that with Jake?
Hey, it seemed really positive. A lot of really positive responses, and it seemed like people were really interested in the kind of, different approach that I have.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating, mate. I think a lot of my questions I've got here are just fleshing out on what you talked about with Jake and all the topics you guys talked about, because some things left me I wouldn't say confused, but want to dig into it a bit more. If you could just give maybe more of a definitive answer as to what you would call your approach, because I guess over time of doing this podcast and meeting lots of people, I've only really heard of a few different approaches. There's obviously the modeling approach, which you guys discussed a lot. There's the steam chasing kind of approach where you're kind of just following movements in the markets. If you could just explain exactly what you do in the simplest form, that would be awesome.
Yeah, well, basically what I do is I take the past closing lines and I adjust those for any conditions that may have caused the line to adjust. For example, say the Lakers were -7 yesterday. And if LeBron did not play, that would mean they truly were not a -7. They were more like a -12. So then I would adjust the closing line to -12 as far as for my power rankings. So I do this for every game in the league for that day. And then I use those to generate a power ranking based on the past lines.
Okay. So you wouldn't say you're doing any modeling at all, because I guess when you come up with I think that you mentioned that you come up with a number yourself. Isn't that modeling in a way?
Well, in the purest forms, it's probably a real generic form of linear regression. So I guess you could consider it, in the sense of that it's like linear regression, in that you're basically just getting a mean number, using only one data set. So you're not really getting this, all these different lines that come together and cross and go everywhere, as in a Poisson or something like that. It's more of just a simple regression type model that just takes the one set of data, which is the closing line, or the adjusted closing lines, shall we say.
How many closing lines are you going back, if that makes sense? Is it just 1 week, 2 weeks, the whole season?
Oh no, I go usually, depending on the sport, but for basketball, I go back about 10, 12 games. And then if, I go back 10 or 12 games, and if that number's real far off the mean, then I might use more or I might use less. And of course, I always add in some weight too. I give more weight to the closest lines, to the most recent lines, than I do the lines that are, 12 games back.
So how, I guess the way I think about it is probably not in the sense of a basketball, because I don't really watch too much basketball. If I had to think of it from let's just say Premier League standpoint, if I had Arsenal playing Liverpool, and then the next week you had Arsenal playing Sheffield United, obviously the odds are going to be completely different, because you're talking about Liverpool being one of the best teams in the world, Sheffield United not even close to that. So how would you then, how can you actually use the closing line from a completely set of different circumstances?
Well, the thing is that those lines also take into consideration the let's say the strength of schedule, or the average line of the opponent as well. So like if you had two teams that were, say, I'm going to use American odds because it's easy for me. I hope that doesn't kill you.
Right.
But so let's say that Team A is playing Team B. Team A is an average line of minus 150, and Team B is an average line of 150, right? So they're equal. The teams are equal as you consider just on the average line. But at the other side of it, we're going to take the average of their opponent's line. So if Team A's average opponent line was plus 150 and Team B's average opponent line was plus 100, that would tell us that Team B is 50 cents better than Team A.
Okay.
So that would account for that, where you said, the good team against the bad team, and how their lines would be so different.
Yeah. Okay. I guess from what I gathered is that I think you mentioned it. You said you're in the adjustment business. Is that how you would maybe sum up your approach the best?
I would think that it would be easy for someone to say, okay, look, I'm just going to take the average line of this team, the average line of all of their opponents, average them out, and come up with a number. And that would probably be okay. That's not going to be real accurate, because the real beauty, or the thing that kind of gets it down nice and clean, is the adjustments for a star player being out, weather, injuries, rest, those kind of things. So you're adjusting those closed lines based on injury adjustments or things like that. So that's how you get a little bit more precise.
Okay. And I assume, so weather, injuries, rest, can you think of like anything else that you think, obviously the reason you've been so successful, like, can you think of anything else that the markets you think don't take into account?
When you think of there's always going to be bias in some lines, right? I mean, if the Dallas Cowboys are playing at home against the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cowboys won 10 straight and the Cincinnati Bengals lost 10 straight, it's probably reasonable to assume that line probably isn't really true, that it might be a little shaded towards the Cowboys, right? So I would think that, there's always that little tiny bit of room in there for the line to have, a little adjustment for the popularity of a team or something like that.
Yeah. And these are the exact like situations that you're taking advantage of. Like, you've obviously got your own data and all this kind of stuff, and you're seeing that, the last, 3 times the Lakers have played without LeBron. That's probably a terrible example that they performed or they closed at this number. Like, this is the kind of data that you're looking at to see how you're going to bet.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it goes into a lot of people overreact to injuries. Like for an example, if LeBron, AD, and Danny Green were out tonight against the Heat, I think the market would way overreact. When they're probably all 3 out, it's probably worth maybe 8 points, 10 points to the line. I don't know specifically. I'd have to do the math, but I'm saying if those 3 star players were out, don't you think a lot of people would be leaning a lot harder towards the Heat?
Of course, yeah.
And I think that sometimes that can create, a small hole that you can probably fill in. But the truth is, at the end, the line is probably going to get back to where it should be anyway. So you have to find it right where it's still got a hole in it. Because, the whole belief is that the line is overall efficient. That's what the whole model is based on, right? You're using lines as part of your power ranking. So if you're using the lines, you have to believe the lines are true.
And how many of these opportunities, probably best to ask you, like, what sports you're focused on mostly?
I bet every single sport there is.
Yeah. Okay. I love it.
I bet all sports. I bet Dota. I bet CSGO. I bet NBA. I bet EPL. I bet everything there is. Anything that's got a closing line, I pretty much bet in that market.
I assume you find it maybe a lot more easier in esports to find these opportunities.
It's a lot easier to find opportunities in esports. The problem is that esports has a huge margin. So you don't have a lot of room to play in. I mean, it might be easier to find opportunities, but with the huge margin, it's, it makes it tougher to make money.
Yeah, so I guess when I first listened to your conversation with Jake, I thought maybe like your approach, it sounded like you were very heavily based in American sports, and that you maybe, put on a couple bets a week, or, maybe, 10, 20, 30, and you just smash the ones that you think are incorrect lines, like ones that aren't taking in the weather and these kind of situations. But would you say you're probably more of a volume better than and betting on these like minor discrepancies?
Oh, I bet huge volume. As I talked about in the other podcast a ton, was the variance monster. And one of the easiest ways to overcome and deal with variance is to have tons of volume. I try to base what I do. When I first got into this, I said, well, who makes money doing this? And who makes money doing this is the book. So maybe what we need to do as a bettor is try to duplicate what the book is doing. What does a book do? Well, they bet. They don't care what happens, win or loss. They know that eventually it's going to catch up with the line value and the margin. So they don't care about wins and losses. I don't care about wins and losses. They look for line value. I look for line value. Yeah. They operate in volume. I operate on volume. So I'm basically trying to duplicate what they do from the other side of the table.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're not, I don't know how to explain this, but there's a guy that comes on the podcast all the time called Haru Masan. He's a pro sports bettor. So he's more so reading the markets and predicting when, something's going to come in, or he's obviously spent millions of hours tracking the markets, and he knows that when he sees something in the market, whatever market that is, obviously all sports are different, but when he sees something that means, okay, the price is probably about to come in, I'm going to get on and follow that movement and get some closing line value. Would you say you do that at all?
I don't really look at line movement, and I really don't pay attention to anything. I create and generate a fair line for the game before the game. I don't use any anchor bias. I don't look at any lines that are out, because that might influence my decision or my, what I think the line should be. Example today, I have Garrett Cole in the Yankee game. My line that I created is minus 139. I think it opened close to 139, and I think it's sitting right now at about 150. So if I would have looked at their line and used their line to kind of adjust my line, then my 139 wouldn't be good anymore. I probably would have came in closer to 148 or something closer to their line, right? So I try to avoid any bias from the actual line that's out. My line is my line.
Yeah. And so we've talked a lot already about what bookies do take or don't take into account. Sorry. Can you explain some of the like obvious things that they are taking into account? Obviously, like, if you're talking EPL and all these kind of soccer markets, it's expected goals and all these kind of things. Can you flesh out what you think they are taking into account, or where it's like almost impossible if you're using this data, it's impossible to have an edge against them because they're using the exact same thing as you?
Well, that's the thing is, books open primarily on a little psych. They use a super solid model, and they also have a little desire to get action. And I think sometimes that desire to get action, it creates a little bit of a hole for bettors as well. But like the Cowboys are at home and they're big faves. So if they're big favorites, there'll probably be a few more cents on the fave than the opener would dictate. But that will adjust. So if the book knows the Cowboys should be -6, they will open it early at like 7.5 or 7, because they would know that they're going to get a little bit of action on the +7.5, +7 side, because they know in the end, when a lot of the other bettors come into it, they're going to go heavy on the -7 and -7.5. You see what I mean? So there's a little bit of psych that goes into their line too. I don't think that they just open on a model and just say, okay, hey, this is what the line should be. It should be 6. They say, hey, we want to get action, we want to get activity. The only way we're going to get activity on the other side is to give a little bit of room, because there's a dead zone. Every line has a dead zone where sharp bettors aren't going to take any action, and recreational bettors are like, oh, that's not enough. They're too favored. So when it gets to that kind of dead zone, that probably ends up being close to your closing line.
And so, I mean, you mentioned in the podcast with Jake that you said that, and you said already today, that it's efficient, but sometimes it's not. Like, how do you define when the market isn't efficient?
I think that the market's going to close efficient. I think that the process of going from open to when the limits first rise to when the market closes, in that area is where you can actually see some of the spots, like where the Cowboys are minus 7.5, so you can take the plus 7.5 on the other side. And it'll end up closing close to the 6, because a lot of the sharper bettors are going to come in and suck up that 7.5 and that 7 and draw back down towards 6.
So you're trying to bet when the market isn't efficient, so before closing line and stuff like that. Is there ever but like within your model, you're saying that this is the perfect number. So let's say -6 is the perfect number. What if the market is at I really struggle with American odds, but I should probably use decimals, but let's just say you're saying the perfect
number. You can use
number.
decimals.
Let's just say
decimals. It's okay.
Yeah, let's just do that. You bet 2, or you think the perfect number is 2, the market's at 2.1, so then you've got value there. But how many times does the number end up being 2, if you get what I mean? Like, how many times are you actually predicting that the closing line is going to be there eventually?
Well, when I take a, let's say there's a card of 10 games, and I do my magic on 10 games. So when I use my method on those 10 games, I'm going to be really close to the line on 7, 8 of them, right? To the current line. And then there might be that 1 or 2 games where there's some differences, where say I have, like you said, say that I think the line's going to be 2. So there might be 1 or 2 games where I see it sitting at 2.15 or 2.2 or something like that. So those would probably be the betting opportunities. But what your question was more like, you got to understand that the market starts at A and ends at Z, and it's never really efficient until it gets to Z. So we try to grab it somewhere when the limits have went up enough for it to be interesting, and somewhere in between there. So that would be why. And when you're looking at how many times, I try to have the market move my direction 75% of the time. And that's about what we see. Now, about 60% of the time, it moves enough in my direction to create positive expected value.
Yeah. Okay. And so what are some of the things that you see that make you think the price will move in or something like that?
Well, I mean, it's all in the predictive value of the lines that I generated. I am of the belief that no matter what the line says right now, it's going to close at 2. Right? So if it's sitting at 1.7, I take the other side. If it's sitting at 2.3, I take this side, because I still believe that it's going to close at 2. And 75% of the time, it goes towards 2. And 60% of the time, it'll move close enough to 2 that whatever I bet at is going to have expected positive value.
Okay. People and closing line values, mate, like people that create their own CLV, like what can they use? Like these, betting syndicates, or even just, professional bettors who are putting down lots of money on maybe smaller markets. Like what can they use to know that their strategy is effective in the long run?
Well, people that get CLV, they need cliff detection. Cliff detection is the number one thing that everyone must have. And anyone that doesn't have some form of cliff detection in their or of what they're doing, in my mind, they're destined for failure in the long run. People that get CLV need cliff detection as much as anyone, if not more. They have to use their projected probabilities and compare those to the closing lines on the markets. And they need to be damn near right on. They need to be really, really close to what the closing line is. I don't understand how someone can go and look at a roster of games and can look at a card and say, oh, I think the Jets are going to cover that 6. I think the Jets are going to cover it. How can you say that if you don't have a line for what the Jets should be? So I've never understood like how people can just say, oh, the Jets are going to cover that 6, no problem. I don't understand that if you don't have a line for what the Jets should be. So the Jets should be 9, they should be 10. What makes you think they're going to cover that 6 by just not? So the only way you can make that opinion and place that bet is to know, right? But when you were talking about how people with CLV, what they can do, how people that create CLV, they have to use cliff detection. They have to look at the other markets that they didn't bet in the same league and see how close their predictions were to what the closing line is. Because they're all making these probabilities, right? They're making a probability that it's a 50-50 game. For example, let's say they see it's going to be the chances of team A winning is 50%. Now, without their bet, without influence, does that line close at 50%? If it does, then they probably have a really solid system and they can keep betting on the ones where they see the gaps. So that's how someone that gets CLV can that's how they can create a cliff detection system for themselves.
No, that's awesome. And on the other hand, people that don't care about CLV at all, I mean, I've talked to a few of them. What would you say to someone who would rather trust their own opinion on a football game, basketball game, whatever, over trying to beat the closing line over a long sample size?
Well, I would say if your predictions for games are very close to what the closing numbers are on 80, 90% of games, whether you bet them or not, you can pretty much trust what you're doing. But I would also say to those people, we know, right? I mean, me and you both know. I know people that win all the time and they could care less about closing line. They don't even track closing line.
Yeah, of course.
And they're long-term winners. So you can't say that it doesn't exist, that there's no such, if you don't have closing line value, you don't win. That's not true. There's a lot of people that don't need CLV and they win. And I guess what it comes down to is they somehow are able to identify something's wrong in the market better than the market does, which is kind of hard to believe.
So hard
in my mind.
Isn't that just
right?
called luck?
But they exist. I mean, there's long-term people that go beyond survivorship bias that are able to see something in the market that others can't see, and that includes everybody together in this wisdom of the crowd theory that they're able to see that others just can't see. I don't know how. I don't understand how that works, but it's real.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. But is there? Do you think there's a number like of bets? I mean, there's obviously no perfect number, like amount of bets. Like let's just say if I've bet 10,000 times, I've never beat the closing line once, but I'm a millionaire. Like, do you think I still need to bet more than 10,000 times, or do you think the sample size where you judge me and go, oh, maybe it's not just dumb luck, maybe this guy just is really good at reading games and stuff like that? Do you think there's a number that those kind of people need to get past to show their true potential or believe in them a bit more?
Well, I mean, I think you can look at P, Z, Y scores, and you can come up with the chances of me being lucky are really, really, really low. But without some sort of cliff detection, those people are doomed as well, because these books work every day trying to figure out how to be more efficient. And if you're doing that same method of, your voodoo, you're shaking some rocks together and you're able to come, to beat the market over 10,000, 20,000 games, books are going to get smart to that. And if you don't have some kind of cliff detection to be able to tell you when that edge is gone, when your opinion is not as valuable, when your opinion doesn't generate value, you're going to lose your money anyway. You're just holding their money for them until they figure out how to beat you.
Before I go on more about cliff detection, I just have one more question about closing line. I found this really fascinating. You said if I've consistently got 2.0 for something that closes at 1.0, that would make you worried. But isn't that like, or that would I guess make you, maybe you would feel like in that situation where you've hit the cliff. But like, isn't that what you want though? Like, isn't that like the ultimate, I guess, situation in terms of closing line value, that if you got something for 2 and it closes at 1.8, wouldn't you just be happy as Larry?
Well, I mean, in a sense, you would be, right, because you would know, you would have a few things that are working for you. You'd have that confirmation. You would be knowing, you would know that the market is confirming that your choice was a good choice and that your choice had value. So that's good. That's a positive thing, right? I mean, on itself, alone by itself, that's a positive thing. But at the same time, if you say you're modeling, and I use the term modeling loosely, I shouldn't, but say your method gives you a 2.2. You think the fair number is 2.2, and it's closing at 1.7, right? That kind of tells you right there that your probabilities are way off. And if your probabilities are way off, they're probably going to be way off in both directions. It's not like your probabilities are going to be way off in one direction only. So I would be, like I said, I would be scared if I'm betting at 2.2, thinking it's going to be 2, and it closes at 1.4. If that happened on a regular basis, great. But I would be scared, and I wouldn't count that as income.
And is that kind of your only way to see the cliff? Like, is that detect that you're about to fall off the cliff?
I think it's the only thing that works. Because, I mean, for God's sake, the Chicago Bears won last night. That's you can't use that data. You can't use results. You can't say, look, my winning record is 56% over 5,000 games. I don't think that's a good measuring stick. I don't think that's something that someone should use to analyze their future. And plus, like I just said, without some kind of cliff detection that lets you analyze what you're doing every day, books are getting smarter. Bettors are getting smarter. If bettors get smarter, it doesn't even require the book to get smarter. If bettors get smarter, your edge is going to be gone.
Yeah. It's a funny game, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. And the thing is everything that I'm telling you, there's probably a million other people out there that think everything I'm saying is complete BS.
Yeah.
And then there's a billion other people out there that say, oh, that's a good idea, but let's put a spin on it. So you're always, I mean, that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why you fall in love with it. Yeah. So your cliff, mate, how many times, or have you ever fallen off the cliff or detected that you're about to?
Yeah, I had some real, and honestly, I still have some real struggles with MLB. I can get in MLB and I can sit here and do lines all day long and be perfect. I mean, just dang near hitting the closing line with every line that I create for a month straight. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, kabam, I'm off. I'm 30 cents off of every game. I'm 30 cents too favored here. I'm 30 cents too long shot here. And then I have to go back and just, figure out where I'm not adjusting right. Where am I making mistakes? What's changing? What's doing these things? It happens a lot.
How often would you say?
I would say at least once or twice per season.
Okay.
Where everything just falls apart,
It must be scary, mate, because, I mean, if it were from my perspective, like, I'm not a professional sports bettor or anything, but if my sole income was based off something that, just snapped like that and changed, and I had to change everything around again, surely that must be a bit crazy.
I mean, I think it is. I mean, I have other income sources, but the biggest thing is it's depressing. it's hard on the psyche to think that you've done all this work, you built all these sheets, you've collected all this data, you've adjusted all this data, you've done all this stuff, you put it all together, and it tastes like shit. Right?
Yeah. Do you
I mean,
do you ever have to take a break, or like how do you deal with the emotional side of things?
365 days a year. I love it.
Never take a break, eh?
I work tons. I have a wife and a kid, and I work tons, and they pretty much just, my life is, I love what I do. I really love it. I have a true passion for it. You'll not find me on Twitter talking about betting. You'll never not find me talking to someone about something to do with betting. I mean, I really have a passion for it.
And one of the things that I found like really, really fascinating was that you said you don't check your win-loss record at all. Like, how long did it take you to implement that into your betting?
Well, I think that what happens with our win-loss record is it creates bias. It makes us doubt ourselves, right? I mean, if you predict that the Raiders are going to score 23 points and they score 60, and then the next week you predict they're going to score 27 and they score 49, and then and you just keep doing that. I mean, it kind of really knocks on the psyche to where you're thinking, man, am I doing this wrong? Right? So I really try to avoid results because results are random, right? I mean, results in sports are random. I mean, as random as they can be. I mean, like I said, the Chicago Bears won last night. I could have never guessed in a million years the Chicago Bears were going to win that game.
How long did it take you to put that into practice, though? Because I imagine it must have taken a long time.
It's still in the learning stages. Believe me, I'm still screaming at the TV now and then.
Yeah. But like not checking your win-loss record, like sure, like I don't know how, like you must check it every now and then.
No, I do check it. I check it more for balance than I do for win-losses. Okay. Because I have to keep a toll on what my balances are on things. If I go on a real bad streak, I might have to, put more money in or do something like that. But I really avoid trying to see it. I really just look at balance. And I mainly look at balance just to make sure that I have enough money to cover what I'm trying to do for the next day.
Yeah, okay. Have you ever said to one of your mates or anything like that, like, I don't check my win-loss record? And if so, what's their reaction?
Oh, people think you're crazy. They're like, how do you know if you're any good at it if you don't know if you won or lost? Because it's the process that's the beauty. The art, the beauty and the cool stuff is the process. The process is what I really love and appreciate. The result is random. Tom Brady's going to throw a touchdown. Tom Brady's going to throw an interception. All that's random. But the process is the beauty. It's the art. It's it's what's hanging on the wall.
Yeah. Now, you sent me a message yesterday after the latest Betting Experts article, question 12, where we asked everyone their 3 most common mistakes they see in betting. This is your comment. I love this one. You sent me a message. You said, I feel like those other guys, referring to the other betting experts, are trying to impress their sharp friends. Can you talk me through that?
Well, I think most of the experts give opinions to Twitter world or on podcasts, and it's more to sound smart. In some cases, they are just too smart. I mean, they don't want to sound smart. They're just too smart. You got like guys like Rufus, Poker Joe, Marco. They don't need me to tell them how to bet or give them analysis or show them how to do things. Those guys, they know what they're doing. I can sit on a Zoom call with Marco Bloom for 2 hours, and not once in that conversation am I going to tell him something he doesn't know already, right? I mean, these guys are smart. They're super, they're super into this. So when these guys write these complex answers, it's not for Joe, the guy trying to learn, or Frank, the guy who's getting a handle on betting. It's for their sharp buddies to confirm what they both already know. And it's the same way in these Twitter circles. They sit here and they talk to each other about linear regression, Poisson, and how people are overanalyzing stuff. That's not what Joe or Frank needs. And I think that when I read some of those responses, I mean, they were talking about like the psyche of people and are you making this bet for a good psychological reason? And don't get me wrong, all their answers are really smart and they're really good answers. I just don't think they go to the guys that are looking for answers.
Okay, so instead of...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get what you mean now. So instead of, catering to those, I'd probably say the people that go onto the Trademate Sports blog are probably like the 5% of sports bettors in the world, the 5% best sports bettors in the world. Whereas, so you're saying, what we're saying is that their answers should be catered towards the other 95%.
Well, no, I mean, I think their answers go to the 5%, but I mean, do you think that I can really teach Rufus anything about linear regression? Do you think I could teach him anything about the psychology of betting? I don't. No. I think that, the people that are really wanting this information and this data are maybe in that, not the 5%, not the 95%. Maybe they're at the getting ready to be in the 5%. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I get exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to insult anyone. I mean, I think these guys are super smart, and I'm not putting down any of their answers.
Yeah, no, that's just, I didn't think you were either, but I just thought it was very interesting. Just wanted you to delve deeper into that. Mate, I want to talk bankroll management and kind of staking, I guess. How do you go about staking your betting?
Well, what I do is I take, and I always bet to win 1 unit.
Okay.
I always bet to win 1 unit. So if it's a big favorite, I bet a lot more. If it's a big underdog, I bet a lot less. I only bet to win 1 unit. And the reason I do that is because I prefer to have more money on things that are going to happen more often. Just to try to minimize drawdown, just to try to keep my bankroll from going in these real extreme ups and downs,
Okay. So that's
the main reason I do that.
You've never tried Kelly or anything like that? Because I mean, you could implement something like that, because you can actually, from your spreadsheets or whatever, you have an actual, you'll be able to create numbers there of what percentage edge that you have.
I don't like Kelly. And the reason I don't like Kelly is because I don't think that when we bet, okay, let me give you an example. When we bet, let's say the line is at 2.2 right now, and we're going to bet at 2.2. And we think the line should be at 2. So there's 0.2 of value there, right? Forget the fig. Let's don't get all technical. There's 0.2 of value there, right? So you throw that into a Kelly formula and it gives you a bet size. Well, what happens if that line closes at 1.7? Or what if it only closes at 2.08 or 2.1? Now your Kelly calculation is wrong. So I don't like Kelly for the reason is that when we bet, we don't know what the true probability or the implied probability will be of that event until the line closes, because then it's the efficient number, and that's what the truer implied probability is. So that's why I don't like Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I've implemented the strategy that you're saying for betting for one unit, and it made more sense to me because I was trying to play around with a few things, and you get people to tell you to do flat stake sizing, but it never really made sense to me because I was always worried that flat staking kind of it's based on your opinion. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what I always worried about. Like I would rather just bet what the odds are saying.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why the betting to win 1 unit works for that. know, you're basically taking into consideration what the actual probability of the event is, right?
Do you think that's like one of the most common mistakes in bankroll management, that people are just betting, based on what they think, like how much they love this bet kind of thing?
Well, let me tell you this. If you're trying to establish a real betting method and business, you need to have a bankroll and you need to stick with one bet size. But the other side of that coin is too, that's real easy for a guy to say that's sitting on a $500,000 bankroll. If you're a guy that's just, trying to get started and you're starting with a little bit of money, you're probably going to risk a little more. I don't think that 1% to 2% stuff works at all for a guy that's just getting started in this business. He's going to have to take chances. This is betting, for God's sake. I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? We're betting. We're taking risk. You're going to have to risk more than 1% or 2% to get yourself in this game to where you even have a chance. If you're not sitting on a six-figure plus bankroll, you're going to have to take chances to even give yourself in an opportunity, in a position to even be in the game. And the other thing is if you bet $100 on one game and you bet $10 on three others, the games you bet $10 on don't matter, right? It's just the one game for $100 that matters. So why even bet the three others for 10? I never understood that, that the people are like, oh, I really think I like the Steelers, so I'm going to put 100 on that, and then I'm going to put 10 on the Bengals because I don't like them as much. It doesn't make sense. There's no reason to even place those $10 bets. Just bet the 100, and if you win, you win. Because if the 100 bet loses, the other three don't matter anyway, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it keeps it simple, doesn't it? I mean, there's no crazy, Kelly criterion formula, and no trying to look at your own opinion and think, yeah, I like this more than that. Like, it's very easy to implement.
The thing I tell my friends, bet enough so you get nervous about the game, but don't bet enough where you have to sell the TV after the game is over.
I like that. That's
the best bankroll management you can get right there.
Yeah, definitely. It's life management, mate. Mate, my final question for you. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but if I said Danshan, I really like what you're saying, mate. I want to do exactly what you're doing. I want to implement your strategies into my betting. How does someone learn your system?
I think the way, I mean, it's really simple. I mean, the thing that's, not everyone in the world can sit down and start learning linear regression. Not everyone can sit here and start working on mean data sets, outliers. People can't do that. I mean, not people can't do that, but a majority of people can't do that. So I think that my system is a lot better for someone to get started with. And it's pretty easy. I mean, it just takes a lot of entering data into spreadsheets. And because you're not just pulling an API and just getting these lines, automatically fed into a spreadsheet and then some formula averages them out. You have to look at every individual line, look at every single injury that could have affected that line. You have to look at, what the weather did in certain sports. You have to look at, like for esports, it's a killer. You got to look at, this player didn't play, and they announce it literally seconds before the game. I mean, and you got to, so if someone was going to do that, all you're basically doing with what I do is you're doing accounting. You're keeping track of what the value of players is worth, injuries are worth, and rest and weather. And you're just adjusting numbers that come out of the screen based on those, injuries, weather, rest. And then it's simple from there. It really is that easy. So I think that someone could do what I do a lot easier than they can go get a PhD in statistics and learn how to do Poisson or, some kind of linear regression and running a 10 million Monte Carlos.
So you think, I mean, from what I gathered, do you think it's just time and effort, spending at your computer, learning, like a lot of things in life, just spending time and learning that way?
Well, yeah, and the thing is it requires a lot of work. I get a lot of people that ask me, like, hey, man, can you show me? And I'm like, sure, yeah, let me show you. And they're interested for about a week. Because once they learn how hard it is and how much data they have to keep track of, and then once they get into the losing sucks. It sucks to take the plus 340, the 3.4, 4.4 Marlins 4 days in a row because there's value there. And you're going to lose every one of those.
I love that. It kind of sums up, you see that so many times. Obviously, Trademate's just using Trademate's just based on, when the sharps go down in money and the softs have still stayed at the same same number, but you just see that team that you're about to bet on, and it's just depressing, isn't it?
Oh God. I mean, you're like, oh my God, you got the best pitcher in baseball against the absolute worst hitting team in baseball. And I got to take the worst team in baseball that hasn't had more than 2 runs in a week. And I got to take them over 3.5.
It's brilliant,
yeah. And that's just, it's a horrible way of life. It's a horrible existence.
Yeah, definitely. All right, mate, that's all I've got for you. Anything else you wanted to you share with everyone, and maybe just put out your Twitter handle or anything like that where people can find you?
Yeah, pretty much everyone that knows me knows that, I'm at Spot On Parts, on Twitter, and you can always, and I'm always open and answer any question. I love this stuff. I'm passionate. I answer emails from people and Twitter, DMs all day long from people. And even as I start talking to you and you're like, man, I just didn't ask you all that. And I start asking you all kinds of questions and, so I love this stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always available.
Yeah, of course. I can advocate for that. I've never had someone actually message us, especially someone of your stature, message us and say, I want to come on the podcast. So it was an awesome message to get, mate. And pleasure having you on.
Yeah, it was fun, man. We'll do it again once we get the responses for this one.
Yeah. You probably should be a message tomorrow, mate. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Next podcast coming out will probably maybe be we'll do a preview of the EPL with George and Haru. Just not too sure about that. I might be on a plane, so not sure about that at the moment. But other than that, thanks for listening. Make sure to do a quick rate and review of the podcast and subscribe to us wherever you listen. And if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today, especially the value betting ones, start a free week trial of Trademate. Dan, thanks again, mate.
Yeah, it was great, man. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, guys.